Okay.
Okay, sounds great. So I am super grateful and very excited to have another one of our mama graduates here. So this is Shannon, and I'm going to let her introduce herself in just a moment. But we're here today because her and her son did an incredible job in the program. They got outstanding results. I was just telling her that I was looking this over. His phonological awareness went from being 45% accurate to 100% accurate. His reading went from the 12th percentile to the 53rd percentile. His spelling went from the 6th percentile to the 18th percentile with, an additional 9 of those items being phonetically accurate. If those would have been right, it would have been like 84% or 84th percentile. So just massive, massive shift. And he was only in the course for a couple of months, so we're not talking about years and years of struggle. Like this was all in a relatively short period of time. So welcome, Shannon. Thank you so much for being here.
Yep. Happy to be here.
Would you tell us just a little bit more about your son, how old he is, what things look like for you before you started the program?
Yep. So Tucker is 8. He will be 9 in October. And so we did the program starting, I believe, in like last November, December. And, we were done by May, right? At least by May. So around that time. So Tucker has always been one of those kids who, as a mom, I knew we have 3 other kids and he's the third. And I knew something was going on, but we did all the developmental pediatrician stuff. We did all of that stuff. And he never was caught for anything, not speech, not, I could tell there were communication issues, memory issues, things of that nature. And even just academically, over the years, so I'll get to that in a second, but like, I just knew even when he was a little guy that like, he just communicated differently. He couldn't remember people's names. He said he'd seen 1,000 times and knew very well. He'd get people confused, things like that. And I'm like, but there was no name for what we were experiencing. And the doctor was like, developmentally, he's doing fine. He's within the normal range of all the things. And so we're like, okay, like, we're just going to keep going with it. So COVID was, I guess it would have been his kindergarten year would have been 2020 and maybe 21. It was 21. Yeah. And I started out actually homeschooling him. But again, that teaching him was very difficult because his brain is going at 1,000 miles an hour and I couldn't keep up. And so we ended up sending him to kindergarten and first grade at our public school. And he really loved school. He really thrived in the social environment, but we were seeing he was caught for intervention for reading, both kindergarten and first grade. And in first grade, the bells were going off in my head because he just was not progressing. Like he was, on level A. And I think by January, he was still like maybe to B. And I'm like, he's one of 4. We've had other examples of what reading looks like and how the progression goes. And I was like, something's weird. And then we also saw that his writing, like his papers were blank when he was coming home in first grade. So blank papers. And we're like, okay, that's weird. That's when we decided to get him tested for dyslexia. And the tutor, this is like Barton program, Orton Gillingham, they were like, definitely dyslexic, potentially profoundly dyslexic. And I'm like, ding, ding, ding. Like, this is all making sense to me. But the prognosis is long and very arduous and very expensive and very, they're basically kind of like, you caught it early, which is great, but it's a 5-year commitment of teaching them to read. And I was just like, it was just disheartening for me because, his personality is such that he did not want to do things at home. Like it was going to be a battle is what I guess I'm saying. So 5 years of battle just was sounding super overwhelming to me. And I was like, and for him. So like, that's kind of where we were at when we started the program. Like that's how things went. Is like the long-term, it was just like, profound dyslexic, and then we ended up doing the neuropsych, which again, all of these steps now looking back weren't actually necessary. And I would love to save people that process and do this instead, because we did the neuropsych and dysgraphia, so we do OT, which was totally worth it. That was great. That was a great addition to this program for him to be able to write, which we made insane progress in too. But with the dyslexia, they were kind of like, yeah, it takes forever. And there's kind of no good news. I was like, okay. And so we decided to homeschool him. And that's when we did this program. But I don't think that that was necessary either. Looking back, to be able to do this program in addition to school would have been fine. But at the time, we were doing all these therapies and all these things to try and help jumpstart. But this could definitely have been done, at 7 o'clock at night or 8 o'clock before bed. Because now that I know how the program works, like, we could have done that, so looking back, I wish I would have known that maybe. But overall.
Okay, so tell me more about that, because I'm sure that other people that are listening to this are probably like, what does she mean?
Yeah.
What else should I get rid of? So like, when you say that, what in hindsight, what did you learn that you wish you would have known earlier?
So definitely, if you could start with this instead of doing Orton Gillingham, now with Tuck, we kept the Orton Gillingham tutoring only. It's tutoring in general, just because he and I have a hard time him learning from me. So we kept it just as a practice.
Yep.
But it wouldn't necessarily have to be Orton Gillingham. It could have been any kind of tutoring that was practicing what we were doing. Really, that's what I would have preferred, is like, hey, could we get a tutor that just does what we do, but it's not me for, 30 minutes a day or whatever, or 30 minutes a week or a couple of times a week. So there's that. And it truly is. Now, he was a very resistant learner. And so things that could have taken 10 minutes ended up sometimes taking much longer, or we'd have to break it into pieces or whatever. But we got through it. And like, when I say he's a resistant learner, like he is a resistant learner for me. He's not a resistant learner at school. He loves to learn at school. So for parents who are like, he would never listen, or trust me, I know. And we did it, we got through it, and it wasn't pretty always, but at the end of it, it was totally worth it. 100% worth it.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, thank you for sharing that, because I'm sure that people are like, well, what do you mean? Like, we didn't need this? What do you mean?
Yeah.
So tell me more about some of the celebrations and the things that it looks like now that, like, maybe 6 months ago, a year ago, you would have been like, I don't know that this is an option for us.
So from the very beginning, it makes me emotional when I had my very first phone call. They were kind of like, dream for your kid. And honestly, I think a lot of dyslexic parents, they shut that part off, because
I totally get that.
I couldn't get past the learning issues. And so I didn't go that far, like, I was like, if we make it out alive, we will be okay. And so when they had you dream from that very first phone call about what he could do if he could read, it's very emotional.
Yep.
And I knew it's in there. There's nothing wrong. I knew that, like, there was nothing wrong inside of his brain, but it was different than the normal course of action. And if we could just access the neural pathways and make them stronger, I knew that there was something. So I think it allowed me to dream for him.
Yeah.
It allowed him to dream a little bit. And I think you, in some of the calls, were like, think about it. There was this point where he could read, 3-letter words all of a sudden. Like, it was like, oh my gosh, like, we're reading, fluently, and within that, whatever level we were at. And you were like, okay, think about it. Like, if he could read that now, what could he read? What could he learn from another 14 books? And I'm like, oh my gosh, like, the sky's the limit now, but even going back towards the beginning of the program, like, we could see changes in just neurological things, like stamina. And because whenever I would read out loud, we were a huge read out loud family. I did this with all my kids. He never could do it. He could not do it. It's like his brain was on overload. And so he would either act out or shut down and fall asleep. Like, I would read, and all my other kids are super engaged, but it's like he couldn't comprehend the language that was going. And this program really helped explain to me that this is really a language-based deficiency. The neural pathways are real, which made total sense to me, because I'm like, that's what's been missing, because I'm like, he can't. But, we went down the whole auditory processing. We did all of that, but it's just profound dyslexia. And so when we did all of the early stuff, like we're not even talking about reading yet, like just the brain training at the beginning of this program, we could see like, like the chips are falling into place in a way that nothing has worked up until this point, I mean, we've tried so much. And so it was like the foundations were being built, that most kids develop at, 2 or 3 or whatever, if they're not dyslexic, but they were developing. And so we could see language increase, stamina increase, problem solving ability increased all before we even really began to read, which was insane to me.
Love
So,
that. I
yeah.
love that. And so then I know because you did such a beautiful job of celebrating throughout the process, I want to give you kudos and props for that because I think that that is part of it. Like you have to mentally keep yourself in the game and understand that while it might be difficult right now in this moment, there is still greatness that is possible and you have to still kind of stay in it for that. So like as you were celebrating week after week, I was really impressed to hear how much things were changing for him. So will you tell me a little bit more about like what is it that he's doing now that
Gosh.
maybe he didn't do before?
I so many things. Like, so one would be like, reading out loud. He has stamina. He's able to follow along with his story, ask questions, things like that. And I mean, when I'm telling you, like the child was 8, and I don't think that I ever read out loud to him for more than 30 seconds. He couldn't hang. So that was one major difference from now. At which now I feel comfortable. He's back in public school. And so I feel
That's
comfortable,
huge.
which is huge because I'm like, he wanted to be in school. Like I was like, we got to catch you up. Like we got to figure out a way because you are going to be, and he's not a troublemaker. And so he's not one of those kids who's going to get caught immediately. He probably would have eventually gotten some interventions, maybe. But it's such a mom thing, right? To be able to be like, no, like this is something's not right, but like he's back in public school and I am confident that he can learn from whatever they are teaching, even if he's not able to necessarily keep up writing or even, keep up with the actual words on the screen quite yet. We're getting so close. But,
Yeah.
Even if he can't, he's able to access the knowledge and the stuff that they're throwing to him. So that was number one. Number two, like he is functionally reading, completely functionally reading, like, which
Wow.
is so overwhelming to me because again, when we started the whole dyslexia diagnosis and all the stuff, it's basically like, yeah, maybe by the time he's in junior high, maybe, if you start in first grade, and I'm like, like that's not acceptable to me.
Yeah.
It just wasn't acceptable.
100%. Yep.
So the fact that he can now, I feel comfortable that he could now, does he like reading still? Not so much, but I'm
Yeah.
actually convinced that we're going to get there. I
Of
am.
course you will.
I'm
Yep.
convinced because
100%.
he's confident. I mean, we're getting to the point of confidence, which then opens a whole new world
100%.
of, ability. But like, I feel like he is functionally, I could give him text and functionally he can figure most of it out. There will be some issues, I'm sure. And again, he's only a third grader, which is kind of typical in that developmental range anyway. And so, it's normal for third graders still to not be able to, segment and be able to decode 5-syllable words. Like he can do it if he slows down enough with this program. He knows how to do it,
Yep.
but he's developmentally within that normal-ish range. We're still spelling as a whole thing, but that's beside like the point. I'm like phonetically, we could read what you're writing, which is
Exactly.
super important to me, is for him to be able, that's another thing, is that now he can express himself in writing, which I honestly thought was never going to happen, like ever.
Oh.
And so the fact that he can express himself, again, he's pretty simple in the way that he wants to write, as simple as possible still.
Okay, he's still
Um,
growing.
but he's only a third grade boy, an active boy. So he's like, yeah, I'll write whatever's easiest right now. But we're so much further than where we were when we
Yeah,
started.
I mean, tell me more about that. Like when he was reading before and when he was writing before, what did that look like?
Gosh. Oh my gosh. So when we started the program, I don't think that he would have written a sentence for me at school and like during school hours. I don't think that he would have been able to phonologically break down, I like football enough to be able to write that. It was so chaotic and so overwhelming in his brain that there would have been no way. I truly don't think that dysgraphia was also an issue.
Yep, for
So,
sure.
and that, again, that has been another miracle that he's functionally writing. Also, in fact, we met with his OT at school because we have our OT report from home, and they were basically like, yeah, he's not going to get services here because his handwriting is perfectly fine, and I'm like,
Okay.
the fact that that's the case is huge, but also like, I mean, spacing, and it's the phonological awareness to know where words break apart and,
Uh-huh.
how to break apart syllables. And so we went from that to, by the end of the program, and we continued this the entire summer, writing 8 to 10 sentences a day. And if you would have told me
Every
that
single day. Yeah.
every single day, and he can do it. Like, I
Yep.
mean, it's still kind of a little bit more of an effort than like my
Yep.
other kids, but
Sure.
like, if you would have told me at the beginning of the program that we would be writing 8 to 10 sentences a day, I would not have believed you. So we are.
Yeah, which I mean, when you're thinking about putting him in school and having the confidence to be able to keep up with the material or do what's asked, you know that he's capable of doing that because he was literally doing it every single day. And so I think that it is powerful to know from like a real mom that it is possible. Like this wasn't a multiple year journey. Like this was a couple of months of really getting serious about doing this. And I know that you were committed to it. So that's another thing that I think is just really honest that like we have to say it's not a magic wand. You're
No,
not waving this
no,
over a child and saying like, oh, osmosis is going to help you. It's doing the work
it
and it's
was.
doing that consistently every single day. And so like you said, it isn't always sunshine and roses. You do have challenges where it's like, okay, there's soccer practice and somebody's sick and we have other children and we have to also put dinner on the table and you're making it work, but within the time frame that's required. Like what did that look like for you guys to be able to fit that into your life?
I mean, honestly, it's crazy. Well, and so we have a 7-year-old also who just turned 7. He's in first grade. And we're doing the program with him now. And it's more just as like a supplement. Like he's
Yep.
fine. Like he's not dyslexic, clearly not dyslexic comparatively. But
Uh-huh.
I asked Tucker, I said, buddy, like, do you want to help me
Yeah.
do this with Theo? And he was so excited to be kind of like the leader
Cool.
in this thing. And the fact that he wants to help his brother do the program, is showing how time wise it is not that big of a commitment. I mean, with Theo, we're doing a few sentences a day of, we're just doing the phonological stuff right now.
Yep.
And the fact that Tucker's excited about it and wants to help his brother, and he's like,
That's
I've
awesome.
done this, I know, where, what this looks like time wise, like totally doable, totally worth it. Again, you know, and you gave such grace. I think, and the calls were such a, like, for any mom who is doing this every day and it is hard, and your kid says that they're stupid, or they are fighting you
Mhm.
every second because it's so hard for them to
Yep.
do this. The calls are a lifeline. And there was so much grace on the calls, like, hey, if you could do it for 2 minutes today, do it for 2 minutes. Like, showing up and doing some is better than nothing. Um,
Exactly.
and other moms, we got so many ideas. We laugh so hard because we did, he really hated when he made mistakes. That's still a huge hurdle for him.
Yeah.
And I don't remember who it was, or I don't even on the call, but it was basically like, we still mistakes grow your brain, that's huge. And we would give him a chocolate chip every time he made a mistake, because
I
we're like, oh,
remember you doing that.
mistakes grow your brain. And so, like, at this point, at 8 years old, hopefully when he's 16,
Yeah.
like, oh yeah, mistakes grow my brain. I get a chocolate chip. And now we laugh all the time. Like, oh, mom spilled the milk. I get a chocolate chip. I made a mistake. It's no big deal. And
Yeah.
so things like that, were so critical for me, that like the calls, the support, the other moms who were doing this at the same time that we are with kids, just like Tucker, was so helpful. And there was so much grace. Hey, show up, just do your best. If you do 2 minutes today, that's better than nothing.
That's exactly it. Exactly it. And I think the other thing about it is that you do have the flexibility to make it yours. So, like that strategy that you just mentioned worked for Tucker, and it might not work for another kid. And so I think it's important to acknowledge that as a parent, you know the best about your child better than anybody else. Like if their eye starts looking over, like if the eyebrow goes up, you know exactly what that means and exactly what's going to happen next. And nobody knows that quite like a parent. And so to be able to lean into that knowledge and really just equip you with, here's what to do, and the best way to get him to do that.
Mhm.
I think that's really powerful example. Thank you for sharing
For
that.
sure. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, in looking at his data, and I think that this is another super powerful point to articulate. Like you're right when you say that phonological awareness was a huge struggle for him. So out of the test, I think there were 42 items, and 23 of them were a miss. And so in terms of what that means for the brain, it was incredibly difficult for him to hear the parts of a word, to be able to identify like where that part was, take that out, put some other parts back together. Like the mental Olympics that were required to do any of that word manipulation are critical for decoding and spelling and future success in literacy. But if your brain isn't really able to do
Mhm.
that, that's a very challenging piece. And so I think it's just, to have another real example of, okay, so he went from that to being 100% accurate. And the cascade of change that happened as a result. And so, his reading went from the 12th percentile to the 53rd percentile. So, what you're saying is like he's performing at the same
Yep.
level as everybody else in
Yep.
his class. And so, the 53rd percentile means that he's decoding better than 53 out of 100 of his same age peers.
Yep.
Just average. He's doing
Which is
exactly what everybody
wonderful,
else
which
is
is
doing.
fantastic. I'm like, that is fantastic. Like, and it's interesting too. I was literally thinking, like, with him helping Tucker or helping Theo, I'm like, we're basically doing this program again for him.
Right,
I'm like,
right.
I'm interested to
There's
see just how much he
how
would
much
jump
more.
again.
Yeah,
Because I believe in that so much, like the just
absolutely.
repetition
It's huge.
and but again, it's the neurological, training though that no other program has even talked about. We've done so much research on dyslexia, and basically what we have heard from the beginning is, well, just accept it. He'll always struggle. I mean, truly, like that's
Yeah,
really what we heard. And
yeah,
part of me was like, there is an acceptance of the fact that his brain is wired differently. That's great. Like that doesn't bother me at all. But
yep.
like the fact that I didn't believe that reading had to always be difficult. Like I just didn't accept it. And so like but the program, because it's kind of like what they do with stroke patients, where you're literally creating new neural pathways in the brain. We know that the brain is neuroplastic at this point. We know that
Yes,
there can be new neural pathways made, and
yes.
you could visibly, I wish we could have like done on Tucker, because I'm just like, I know what was not there is now there, which
Yeah,
is a miracle to me. Like, I'm like, that's
yeah.
literally a miracle. Like, you're talking about a incapability of hearing the sounds in a word. And I could have, if you had talked to him, you would have known it immediately that he couldn't hear the sounds in words. And we didn't know too, working memory was such a huge part of that as
Great
well.
point. Great point.
And so he couldn't, even if we had a 3-syllable word, he wouldn't have remembered the first sound by the time he got to the third, or whatever, the third sound by the time he repeated it. I mean, working memory was such a battle. But again, I remember we just repetitively did the program with working memory as part of it. And all of a sudden we tested him again and he was in the 50th percentile when we started at like the third. I mean, so we're like, okay, like we're normal here now. And so now we can build on the fact that
That's right.
working memory is at a normal state to
Right.
where before it was down here and we couldn't even we could we couldn't dissect any words because he couldn't remember what the beginning of the sound of the word was.
100%. Yeah, and
So,
it's such a powerful message. Uh-huh.
I mean, it's huge.
Absolutely. I mean, I think what you're articulating a couple things very beautifully. Number one is that you are your child's best advocate. And so even though there might be somebody or books or several or websites or whatever that say that there's nothing that you can do and this is a lifelong condition and this must be exactly the way that it is, you have to accept as a parent that there's a fundamental disconnect for that for you.
Yep.
Like I refuse to accept that to be true. And I would say that that's true of you and every other
Yeah.
parent that's in the program is that they've come to say like, no, I'm sorry, I just can't accept that that's true. Knowing what we do about science and plasticity and the fact that you can change the brain, it's dynamic and it changes throughout life. And so when we do certain things to it, you can
Yeah.
change what that looks like. And when we don't do certain things, it prunes away and like those things change as well. But it's really powerful to know, like from a real human perspective, how you saw it actually changing for him and his life.
There is, I mean, there is a like literally before and after for him. Like there really is. And again, it's almost more that foundational part,
Yeah.
even more than the actual reading. Like the
Yep.
reading part is really more like, hey, this is how you read. Like that's
Yep.
introduced in kindergarten and first grade. Like that's normal, kind of like stair stepping of, but he was missing all of the beginning part. He was missing that, working memory, phonological awareness. But again, I knew that, but we didn't know how to get it, and we didn't know how to get it fast,
Yep.
and I think that that's where this is so different, this program and the fact that you're working with neuroscience instead of just, a hope and a prayer that they remember all the rules of the English language. Yeah, I think over time, those neural pathways probably do get made over a very long period of time, but what are you sacrificing in that time? You're sacrificing confidence, you're sacrificing being within the group of their peers, you're sacrificing independence because they need help. I mean, there's so much sacrificed,
Mhm.
by not having those fundamental pieces built by the time you're introducing, bigger word language reading concepts, because I'm
Yep.
like, you're skipping a step essentially when you're in school and you're learning how to read, but all these foundational pieces are not there yet. You can't build on them,
Right.
and so you're sacrificing all of these things. And you know I feel like it's foundational and fundamentally important for those things to be built first. And so that's what I have loved watching through this progress. Now I'm like, oh, he can sit in a traditional classroom. And
Yeah.
when they learn the TIO in ending of a word, it's going to be like ding, ding, ding. Like it's right there. He's
You can
within his
learn with
grade level.
everybody else.
Right.
That's
Exactly.
exactly right. Which
Exactly.
is huge. And like I know that it's not fun to think about this, and so I won't make you stay there for a long time, but imagine that you didn't do this,
I
right?
know.
Like if you hadn't taken the risk to say like we've got to do something because there is a risk involved. Like you have to have the faith to say, okay, we're going to try this. We're going to put our
Yeah.
trust in the fact that this is if we show up to do this, we're going to see a change. And imagine if you didn't, like where do you think he might be this year? Like, do
You
you think
know,
he'd be back in school?
No, I don't. I don't think we would be back in school. I don't think I would have felt comfortable because, and not because he loves, well, if we had gone back into school, um, you know, and we might have, because teaching him at home was very difficult.
Can
I
appreciate that.
I would have had to have accepted that school was always, always, always going to be very difficult for him. And I think by the time he was in 7th grade, maybe he would have caught up with his peers sort of with reading. But all these years he would have been the kid who scored really poorly on everything, couldn't keep up in class. And what's really cool too, he told me the other day, he said that he rose his hand. They did the fast bridge testing, which is like the initial testing of at the beginning of the school year to see where everyone is at. and he rose his hand and said something to the effect of, my brain is built differently. I have dyslexia, but basically owning that that's a part of him, that this is a part of him. But what I like is that I feel like a lot of times what the kind of the language around dyslexia, or maybe cultural, what we heard basically was, yeah, dyslexic brain is really cool, but they'll never read well. That's basically what I've heard. And I was willing to accept that. Yeah, like that's so cool. He does have a cool brain. He's got some really cool gifts that my other kids don't have, that are because he's dyslexic. We're not getting rid of any of that. We're just adding the ability to read and write. So like we've got like a double whammy of a kind of kid dynamic at this point, instead of just the kid, because his brain is cool. Like there's nothing wrong with a dyslexic brain whose wiring is just not as typical as the typical reader. And he's got these really cool, he's athletically super inclined, like super talented, like all of these, none of that is going away because he can read now. So we're like, we still get to have the cool parts of the dyslexic brain, and we are functionally reading and writing.
Yeah, which matters so much, because when you think about, your decisions to make life choices, whether it's what your career is going to be, or the school that you want to go to, or whatever it is that you want to do with your life, somewhere in there is going to be your belief in what you're capable of doing. And so having the capacity to have this amazing brain and feel capable to be literate and access everything that you want to access, it gives an entirely different opportunity to him that he may have not had otherwise.
Well,
So
and now too, like we're at third grade, he'll be 9 in October, and we're now working on fluency and comprehension,
which is what everybody else is
which
working
is what
on.
everybody else is working on. Instead of working on fluency and comprehension, when your brain is working so hard to even understand the basics of, syllables,
I hear this sound
right? Like, I mean, now it's like, oh, well, like fluency and comprehension, you're learning along with everybody else because you're functionally reading. And so we can work on those things like normal, and even if those things are affected by dyslexia, we haven't seen that nearly as much as we've seen. I mean, they're there, but they're nothing like that gap at the beginning, right? Like that big hole that was missing. I don't know how we ever would have grown that without this program. I really don't.
Wow. Wow.
I
Well,
don't.
I'm so proud of you, because I mean, truly, you've transformed what the rest of his life looks like. And I know that um, kids don't always know to say those things when they're little, and like appreciate their mom for what you've done. But there will come a time where he looks back on these moments that you've had, and the one-on-one that you got to share. And people do say, like, even though the one-on-one was sometimes hard, like it was one-on-one and there wasn't a screen, and it was just us, and we were just working on supporting you to be your best self. And there will come a time where he's forever grateful for the shift in the way that his life looked.
And I think there's that too. Like as a parent, I think you just have to have the faith that, like, I mean, we felt totally led by God to do this. It was one of those things, the pieces fell into place for this to work. Like, I mean, there are so many cool God stories there, but for him to be able to believe, like I don't know what it would have been, and I don't know what things could have looked like if we didn't do this. And so the fact that there is a faith element here, because you have to have faith that what we did was that life changing, because like, I mean, I have to be like, we changed together with this program. We changed the trajectory of his ability. And I truly believe that.
Wow.
Yeah, truly believe that. So,
wow. Yeah, there's nothing better than I can say than that. So holy cow.
Yeah.
Well, I want to just thank you and honor you for being willing to share your story with others, because it does inspire somebody. Like, surely there's going to be somebody that will watch this and say, I feel hopeless too. Like, I've seen the same websites and I've read the same books that you've read, or I went to the doctor and they mentioned that this is going to be like a multiple year journey. And so I'm sure that your story is going to inspire somebody to know that, like, here's a real person that went through this experience, and it really didn't take them multiple
No,
years to
no.
do this. It was like multiple months. And when you're committed to doing that process and you're creating a supportive environment, like, no, it's not roses every day. She's going to tell you that. But you loved him enough to show up. And even if it's 2 minutes some days,
Yeah,
like, you
yeah,
continued to show up and you were coachable and you did all those things that it really does require in order to make this change. But it's not phenomenal. Like, it's 10 to 15 minutes a
yeah.
day.
No,
You're not talking about like 4 hours of
no.
a session every single day. Like, you can do this, but you're right when you say, like, you do have to believe internally that it's doable, and
Yes,
it's
yes.
worth the time that it
And it,
takes to get through that journey.
and being on the other side of it, like, it's just so worth it. Like, it just is. And like, and again, you're kind of with like a cohort of
Yeah.
usually moms, sometimes dads, grandmas, whatever.
Yep.
But you're kind of in this cohort that's doing it together at the same time. And so to hear we are in so ingrained in our own stories, but to hear the other kids that are going through this program, and sometimes they're 14. I mean, sometimes they've done everything and they're
Yes.
still making crazy progress. But
Yes.
it's because I'm telling you, it's because those foundational pieces were missing and no one has helped them yet. Because I'm like I mean, we see it in brain trauma patients all the time, that those things can be rebuilt over
Yes.
time. And so like the fact that, I'm sitting in the same group and and again, we meet all the time. And so it's the same moms, that are kind of
Yep.
going through the program at the same time. You have a new crop all the time, I'm sure. Probably really exciting for you because it's like
It
a
is.
different, and but to hear their stories and like along with mine at the same time,
It's
these
powerful.
kids, like, I mean, it's changing their lives. And again, it's because those neurological things that needed to be there was just no way for them to get there unless you did something like this. I mean, there just
To
isn't
help them to build those.
to
Yes.
build them. They
Yeah.
just those foundational building blocks were just not there. And so you could teach them all the rules of English, but if they don't have the neural pathway that's supposed to be there, that's not going to stick. And
100%.
so, I feel like there's just so much hope in that, and science, right? Like, it's just scientifically proven. Like, if you start doing the research, which was really cool for me, because like I'm a photographer. Like, I'm not into science necessarily. But once I started doing the research on why this is the way that it is, like it scientifically makes complete sense that this can be built, and so, yeah, and it's not that long in retrospect, in the middle of it, it's like, okay, it's
I
really
can
hard.
appreciate that.
But also the modules, so, and this is just encouragement for someone who's looking into this, like, they're doable. Each
Yeah.
module is not like, oh my gosh, like, I can't do it. No, they're broken down into these little bitty pieces that you are like, okay, this is all you're doing. It's five things. These five little things in a session, or really one thing 5 times or whatever,
Uh-huh. Yep.
over and over again for until they master it.
Mhm.
And then you move on. And I like wouldn't look ahead on purpose,
Yep.
because I'm like,
That's
I don't want to
okay.
know. Like, that seems
Yep.
too overwhelming to do. But like, it's pieced out in such a way that it's totally doable. Totally, totally doable. And I'm really excited to do it with my 7-year-old who's just learning to read. He's just typical developing brain. Because I'm like, oh, this is like super valuable for all of us. Anyone learning to read. It's not like it's going to
100%.
hurt them.
Mm-mm.
But
Nope.
just
It's
the progress quicker, like a quicker progress this time around will be really fun to watch, I think.
absolutely. Well, I
So,
mean, and you're bringing up a great point. I mean, it's great instruction for all. It's essential for someone with
100%,
dyslexia.
100%.
Essential.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was cool too, because I basically, when I went into the school this year and was like, hey, I need to have a meeting with everyone, I told them about this program, and they actually I wrote it down. I should actually find out if they've done any research on it. But I was like, this program was so beneficial for us. But basically our school did like whole language reading, which was the worst for Tucker, literally the worst. They're going back to the science of reading now,
Fantastic.
so which is great. And our
Absolutely.
first grader is doing a lot more phonological stuff, which is
Good.
fantastic. And
Uh-huh.
for a typical developer, we're going to probably sail right through all of that. But with Tuck, they're like, yeah, we've found that just did not work for our school district, and so they're moving back to the science of reading, which is great timing, because we're gonna be basically it's going to be reinforcing all the things that we did in this program, because
Uh-huh.
I mean, we're working on phonological awareness, segmenting words, being able to decode, all of that stuff is so
Mhm.
critical for these kids with dyslexia. It's only going to reinforce what we did in this program at
Absolutely.
school, which is huge.
Mhm.
So I'm very
100%, because
thankful.
it's more repetition.
Just
Right.
more repetition.
Mhm.
Exactly.
Mhm. Yeah, it's tremendous. And I think it's wonderful that that is happening in the transition for your school. And I think that it is happening in a number of places across the country, but it's also true that there are many, many places where that's not happening at all. And so you're left with like, okay, this is what we've got, and
Oh, yeah.
nobody knows what I'm talking about when
But
I say that.
again, even if you did science of reading stuff with a dyslexic child, you still have to have some of those foundational pieces built
I agree.
that I mean, things that I wouldn't have known. It like being able to hear, when we did like the pulling down of each sound, each sound in a word, like I wouldn't have known that was a deficit in Tucker. Like, I mean, I know now, like looking back, I'm like, yes, he definitely couldn't hear each sound in a word or even in a
But
sentence.
now look at him.
Right, but he couldn't have picked out a word in the sentence if I said, "Go back," and, he those they're real little. They're like little things that I'm like, "Oh, like, that's why even if we had done normal phonological, like, reading stuff, like, I don't know that it still would have, like, gone in this direction." He still would have needed intervention because those things weren't there. The being able to hear.
And the other beautiful part about it is that you got to ensure that he mastered that. And so I think what can sometimes happen, and I'll just speak, from my own children's experience, is that you do end up in a classroom with other kids, and
Sure.
they don't always have the same needs as you. And so as the instructor, you are forced to make a decision about when you're going to move on to the next thing.
Mhm.
And yes, you can put kids in small group, and yes, you can provide them one-on-one help, but truly the capacity for the people in the building to work on
Right.
everything exactly to the
100%.
moment that your
Yep.
child needs it is just really, really challenging. And so when you yourself have the tools and you know that you're like making the decision yourself on when we move on and we've mastered this, and yes, you can ask for coaching and support on like, am I right on this?
Yeah.
Great, but you can ensure that there is that foundation in place, and you don't have to wonder if you're building from this faulty
Which was
foundation.
huge for me, and I'm naturally insecure, so, like, I'm like, did we do enough? Are we re" but the calls, again, were so critical for me because 'cause you'd be like, "Actually, you know what you can do? You can kinda bridge them. You can do 2 of these in module 6 and do and introduce module 7." And then it was keeping things fresh for him
Uh-huh.
and for me, but I still had that, like, "Okay, like, have we fully mastered this, before moving on?" And it just there was a lot of grace in that, where it's like, yeah, like you can totally like bridge the modules sometimes, where it's like, oh, he's like right there, but we're getting a
Uh-huh.
little fatigued in this little
Yep.
thing. We're gonna change it up a little bit and go,
Yep.
and he knew that he was making progress when we did that too, and that was in him believing in himself is like
Yeah.
90% of this battle. And so being
100%.
able to see him have confidence, and we did the program with our sixth grader. They all went back to school, and I homeschooled my sixth grader for 4 years, and he if he is dyslexic, it's mild. I mean, I think looking back, I think he probably is dyslexic, but and his was more spelling based issues and like being able to set, segment words. Like even him though, like I feel comfortable with both of them at this point going to school and keeping up with their peers. They are fine. They're fine. I mean, Tucker, it's more profound. It's a little bit more of like just a daily struggle probably for him. But Max, like, we sent him back knowing like, hey, you know how to segment a word, even a really, really difficult word. We were slashing and dashing 6-syllable words
Yep.
sometimes, I
Yep.
mean, like we know how to do that now. And so, and it may not be spelled perfectly right, which doesn't bother me, but somebody would be able to read it. A teacher would be able to read.
We've got all the sounds represented.
We have all the sounds represented, which I don't think was there prior to this program. I think and that's not even the kid that was really, we did it kind of just as like a side thing. We weren't focusing on him nearly as much. So super helpful.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, I mean it when I say that I can't thank you enough for being inspirational to others because it is a hard journey, especially when your baby is struggling. Like as a mom, I'll tell you, like you have sleepless nights a
Yeah.
lot and you're worried a lot and you just want to know that everything is going to be okay for your baby. And so to have a sense of relief about what their experience looks like is truly invaluable. And so I think it's just so powerful to hear that from a real mom of a real boy who was profoundly struggling. And now he's at school today and he's
Yes.
probably doing
And
great.
he's
He's
doing
making new
great. Yes.
friends and
Doing
he's
great.
getting through the material. And
Yes.
of course he can still continue to grow
Sure.
because they all can, all kids
Sure.
can. But to have the closing of a massive gap to make that like this is it's a life changer and
And
not in multiple years.
I would have done it even if it was a 10% increase, right? Like as a mom, like you're like,
Of course.
I would do it for these teeny micro increases, but to see the gap literally close from his peers is unreal. Like I can't, I mean, to say like to send him to school now, makes me emotional, like confident that we're okay. We're going to be okay.
Yeah,
Like it's going to be okay. I
it's
don't
gonna
have to
be
stay up
okay.
at night
No,
worrying, like I don't have
I
to
do.
be anxious every
Yep.
day that he's not getting it, and that is, again, that alone is
It is
worth.
because, like when their tears come down,
Ugh,
I mean, you feel every bit of that. And
yeah.
so, to not have that every single day and the homework and because they can't, they
Mhm.
truly, truly can't. And so it's not an effort thing. It's not that they're trying to be difficult. It's that they
No,
truly
no,
can't.
no.
So when you help them to be able to do that and they're actually able to make those things happen, like everything changes. And so again, thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. And even that second grade, like at the very beginning, we did like the second grade
Yes.
reading. He wouldn't have even, he could not even read the first sentence. And now we're reading more than that daily. I mean, in 6 months, I mean, you're talking literally wouldn't have even attempted it. It was so overwhelming to his brain to being, and it's I mean, it's a passage of age appropriate text about that long, and now he can read books. And I mean, like, I cannot believe that he's able to do that. Like, I really cannot. If you would have told me it at the beginning of the program, I'd be like, you're joking, So and here we are, we're in
Yep.
school, and I know he can keep up. It's not perfect but no kid is,
Agreed.
and so I'm like, it's great, and he can keep up, and it's fantastic. So
Wow. Wow, wow, wow. Well, thank you, Shannon. I
yeah.
sincerely appreciate you. It was an honor and a pleasure to work with you and your family. I mean it when I say that you showed up 100% and that matters. It really does. Like it's not a magic fairy
No,
situation. It is you have to do the repetition and you have to show up and do the work. And you did a beautiful, beautiful job at that.
thank you.
Okay, amazing. Well, thank you again for inspiring so many people. And I will look forward to seeing you again soon.